I mean, we're going to talk about Xinjiang, Tibet, Hong Kong. And what I really like to do on Real Talk China is bring in some of the experts that I feel, really provide some really good insights. And I like people that have been on the ground for a long time, people that speak the language, people that really know these cultural differences. And I think you hit all those boxes. So I think you're really somebody that can bring some truth and bring some really genuine insights into this situation. And I want to transition this into another hot topic, and that's going to be Tibet. Now, I know this is a really interesting one because I believe you first traveled to Tibet in sometime in the late 90s, and I know you just recently traveled for the second time earlier this year. So you've been able to see, Tibet 20 years ago and now, and I know you've seen a tremendous difference. So I'd like to, again, get your insights to someone that's been on the ground in Tibet and someone that really knows, this incredible transformation, because there has been a transformation, probably not what people are thinking. So, tell us about Tibet and your experiences.
I first went to Tibet in 2001. So it was 20 years ago. And it's hard to explain just how poor the people were there then. They were dirty. All the roads were dirt. It took me hours to go from the airport into Lhasa. Now, I actually went to Tibet twice this year. So I went in May and then I went again in September. And it was unbelievable, the changes in the infrastructure, the quality of living, the housing. You could see from the data. I went to a hospital and they were telling us how lifespans have increased. I visited with principals of schools at Lhasa #1 primary, vocational school, as well as the Lhasa #1 high school. And you could see that the gender equality was improving, and you saw literacy rates was improving over the last 20 years. When I first went to Tibet, I actually told my team, I'm going to be gone for a couple weeks. I might be out of touch. I'm not sure if there's going to be internet access or phone access or anything. They had some of the best, most stable internet access that we've had. But I think what was key was a couple things. I interviewed one kid. He was in his early 30s, and he said, Sean, when I was a kid, I couldn't always eat. Being able to eat often was a struggle. Now I can eat whatever I want to eat. I can wear whatever clothes I want to wear. Life is good. Actually, the people in Tibet were probably the most optimistic consumers of anybody that I've interviewed in China in the last 5 years. You can see that their quality of life was improving. Now, let me give you another story. I went into a small village, and I interviewed a 42-year-old man. He's Tibetan. He actually is a party member, and he's a party secretary. Okay, so I think that's key. Yes. A lot of people say that, it's the Han Chinese are coming in and invading and oppressing the poor Tibetans. Great. The village head was a Tibetan. When I went around the village, they actually had signs of if you were a party member, when you became a party member. And some of them had actually become party members in the 1970s. Wow. 40 years ago. Right. So this is not a new thing that's just like reacting to Western government criticism in the last couple of years. You have seen for decades that Tibetans have been actively integrated into the Communist Party and become the leaders in the villages. So it's not an oppression. I've been to Palestine. Right. Okay, I'm half Jewish. I consider myself Jewish more than anything. Okay. I've seen how Israel occupies the West Bank. I see how they're treating the Palestinians. That is a stain on humanity, what's happening in Palestine. Yeah. In Tibet, I interviewed this 42-year-old, and he said, Sean, let me tell you a story. 5 years ago, it used to take 48 hours to drive from Lhasa to his little village. Wow. Now it only takes 40 minutes because of the quality of the infrastructure spending on roads. And what that has allowed is now tourists, Tibetan, Han Chinese, anyone can come to his village to go peach picking or to go on to other, they have hot springs, right? So he says the quality of life, they're able to generate more funds. Second, he said 5 years ago, it could take hours to send my kid to go to school because the roads were so bad. Now it takes 5 minutes. So the kids are able to go to school. And you know what? Because of government programs to help minorities, his kid is going to go to another province for free for study in order to improve lives. So what you see is the government infrastructure spending is creating economic opportunities, and they're helping minorities get access to better quality education. Now, I went to a school, Lhasa Primary #1, and in that school, every kid has to take 6 Mandarin classes a week.
Okay.
But they also have to take 6 Tibetan classes a week. So somehow you've gotten training people in a language, which is like the best thing you can do for children. It equips them with tools to find good jobs. It equips them to be able to communicate with the rest of the world. Somehow that has been bastardized by US media, and they call that cultural genocide. This is insane, right? If you're a school child in the United States, you have to learn English. If you're a school child in the United States, you have to take the SATs because you have to have a common language to be able to function and be able to thrive in a university setting. What China's doing, and this happened in Tibet, this happened in Inner Mongolia, this happened in Xinjiang, is they're now giving that education. They're giving the education for free to the minorities, longer than what they give to Han Chinese, more years for free, so that they can get equipped with skills. It's just shocking, and it makes me disgusted when I hear people categorize or define teaching Tibetans Mandarin as cultural genocide. That's just one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. I've seen firsthand kids learning Tibetan in classes, and their culture, their language being respected by the Chinese government. Absolutely.
Yeah, I really appreciate you shedding some light onto what's happening in Tibet, because I think there's people, one of the things, and I actually made a video about this earlier, talking about the amount of ethnic languages in China, because for most people, many Westerners, they just think of Chinese. There's over 300 different dialects in China. I know, both of us had lived in Shanghai for a long time. I know you go just 30 minutes, by train over to Suzhou, they have a different type of dialect there. Obviously, Mandarin is the language that is the official language. It unites everybody in China. But again, there's over 300 dialects. So there's incredible diversity. And again, same thing. I had actually met somebody here in Canada, very interesting story. His father's from Ireland and his mother was from Inner Mongolia. And he was born in Inner Mongolia and spent his first 18 years in Inner Mongolia before then coming to Canada. And when I met him, he is a mixed race child, obviously exactly like my children. And I thought it was, yeah, exactly. And my wife is Chinese, obviously Caucasian, so we have the mixed race, the 混血儿, as we say in Chinese. And so I was fascinated by his story, and I said, I want to know about Inner Mongolia. Tell me about the language. Tell me about, how that works. Since you grew up there, you can learn Mandarin. We're learning, Mongolian. And there's some people that only, for many years, they only wanted to learn Mongolian. But the problem is if you can only speak Mongolian, where are you going to go in the world? Like, you can only stay in your village. And so the government said, look, you have to learn Mandarin because it's going to open your world up just to other people in your country. And I think that's something that, many Americans, for example, they would be equivalent to being raised in California, but not being able to go to Texas or New York because they speak a different language and you're limited to only your one place. And of course, that would just never happen in America. Everyone has that universal language. And I think it's really important for people to understand that number one, the Tibetan language and these variety, hundreds of languages are alive and thriving in China. But yes, it is very important for everybody to speak Mandarin as well.
Exactly. It's not a policy that's being targeted just on Tibetans or Uyghurs or Inner Mongolians. It's trying to have a common language. And that's why actually Chinese is called Putonghua, right? Putong meaning common and Hua meaning words. So common words, common language, which is what the communists wanted to do to unify the country after 1949. Because as you said, you can go into Xinjiang and you go from province to province, village to village.
Yeah.
You could go 10-minute village away and they have a totally different dialects.
Correct.
So it's important and that the government, I think, allows people to use these languages at home, which they do, right? But then you also have to have everyone speaking one language. It's like in Shanghai. when I first moved to Shanghai full time in 2003, I started hearing all this weird language. I had no idea what was going on. I remember looking at my wife and I said, "Are they speaking Japanese?" Because the language was so completely different from anything that I had heard when I lived in northern China before.
Correct.
And it was Shanghainese, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Do people in Shanghai, do they still have Shanghainese language on TV and videos? Absolutely. But are they forced to learn Mandarin in classrooms? Absolutely. That's part of having a common language. So this is not a racial thing.
Correct.
You know, which the West seems to like to make it out. It's just equipping people with one language to give them better opportunities in life. If the Chinese government didn't do that, we should criticize them.
Correct.
Because that means they're allowing the minorities not to catch up. I actually think the policies they've implemented in Tibet and in Xinjiang, the two especially, to help poor people and help minorities rise up is something that the United States could learn a lot from. Because when you look at the lack of opportunities for Blacks and Hispanics in the United States, you know, clearly affirmative action doesn't work.
Correct.
Clearly projects doesn't work. I actually think that the U.S. should learn from China on how to improve the quality of life of the impecunious in the United States.
Right. No, I think you brought up some really good points there. And you mentioned another province that's a really big hot topic, and let's go ahead and transition to that, and that's Xinjiang. Now, Xinjiang has been in the news tremendously over the last couple of years, and I want to get your insights into there because, again, I know that you have traveled earlier this year, to the Xinjiang province. You have been out to the cotton fields, meeting with farmers, people that are, working in that cotton industry. I want to get your take on what your experiences in Xinjiang were. Was it similar? Were you hearing the local Uyghur language there? And then also, I know you have an interesting take on big companies like Nike and Adidas, Skechers that produce a lot of their cotton, actually comes from Xinjiang. And kind of what is your ideas on this entire industry and, kind of the troubles that are coming from Xinjiang or the, these allegations that we hear? I'd love to hear your insights.
So I went to Xinjiang twice in the last 4 months.
Okay.
And I have to tell you, Cyrus, I love it.
Yeah.
It's one of the most magical provinces I've ever been to. Kashgar especially is such an incredible city. And I'll first answer from a personal standpoint, and then I'll go into answering some of your questions. But
yeah,
I'm half Chinese, and I'm half white.
Yeah.
Well, when I was growing up in the United States in New Hampshire, people were usually nice to me, but they always sort of viewed me as an outsider. New Hampshire was the whitest state in the U.S., so I never felt like I was American in some ways. They always viewed me as kind of Chinese.
Right.
When I'm here in China and Shanghai, everybody views me as sort of American.
Right.
So I'm always different.
Right.
And I love that. I love being different.
Right.
But I gotta tell you, when I was in Xinjiang, I looked like everyone there. I looked like me. People were coming up to me on the street and they would start speaking to me in the local language because they thought I was Uyghur.
Right.
And I was traveling with some Han Chinese, and the Uyghurs would always call me over and say, "Come into my house and let's eat together, or let's drink some beer together." They do drink beer there. Let's go out, and it's their own choice. No one's forcing them.
Right.
They're just trying to have some fun.
Right.
Or let's have meals. I absolutely loved it. It was the first time in my life that I ever felt like I truly belonged physically. It was great. But anyway, let's go into it. I visited the cotton fields. Okay, the cotton fields are mostly owned by Uyghurs, and I went to small ones. I went to big ones. And I interviewed this old man, and he said, "Sean, here's my problem. 20 years ago, it used to cost me 2 or 3 RMB a day to hire a worker. Now it costs me 300 RMB a day. The cost is really high. Right. And you know what? I can't even find Uyghurs to work because the job opportunities are so good, and it's such hard work to work in cotton fields that Uyghurs are not willing to work in the cotton fields. I have to go to Gansu province if I need to hire any laborers. But you know what? We don't even have to do that much because 95% of the process is now automated. So when you go there, you see gigantic DJI drones flying around. You see equipment. And he said, truthfully, it's not about the high labor costs. It's not about automation. My biggest problem is because of US sanctions, I can't buy John Deere and other American equipment makers that are the best at picking and processing cotton, because he said the Chinese manufacturers just are not yet as good as the American manufacturers. And if you look at it, in the quarter before the economic sanctions were slapped on Xinjiang cotton, sales of John Deere, an American company,
that's right,
grew thousands of percent, in the previous quarter, because all of the farmers were so scared they wouldn't be able to buy John Deere equipment anymore.
That's
so
right.
Why isn't the world going to John Deere and asking them what's really happening? If you're making so much money in Xinjiang, how come it's all forced labor? There is no forced labor. Okay, I went exhaustively. I went to 5 different cities, from Akasu to Kashgar to Ulamuchi to Ili to Hetian, to look. Okay, I don't see any forced labor. Are there policies one could criticize? Sure. Now let me give an example of a policy you could criticize. If you're under the age of 18, you're not, if you're Muslim or your parents are Muslim, you're not allowed to practice in a mosque. That is a real policy. And that is a policy that if people want to criticize, you can criticize. Now, I do not view that as an attack directly on Islam. Why? Because they have the exact same rules for Christianity, for Buddhism, for Taoism. In China, under the age of 18, you're not allowed to practice in a mosque or a temple or a church, because the Chinese government wants to allow children not to be forced into a specific religion at birth because of their parents. They want them to allow to practice whatever religion they want after the age of 18 when they're an adult and can choose what faith they want. Now, can you criticize that? Sure. I can understand why some Muslim families or some Christian families or some Jewish families say, my religious faith is a core part of our family DNA. I want my children to go to temple. I want them to go to church, and they don't allow me to because of the laws.
Right.
I can understand. That's a legitimate criticism, and that's open for, but that's, again, not directed just at Islam.
Right.
That's really important. People need to know. It's against all religions, even the historical Chinese ones, again, like a Buddhism or a Taoism.
One of the common things we see in the West is the satellite images, for example, of say, okay, this is a Google Earth image from 4 years ago that was just a desert. And now here's a Google image search of the same desert, but now there's this very big building that's being built, and we believe that this is a concentration camp, and we believe that this is going on here. How do you respond to these? Because this is something that a lot of people have asked me. Cyrus, make a video about Xinjiang. I've been very hesitant because the biggest thing for me is I've never been there. I don't know. I don't really have a lot of insights into Xinjiang. Unfortunately, in my 10 years in China, I've never had a chance to go. Although I have met a lot of Uyghur people in Shanghai. When I was living there. But I want to talk a little bit about that. How would you respond to that?
As someone of Jewish heritage, I am very sensitive to the term genocide. I'm very sensitive to any form of racism. And, is there racism in Xinjiang? Of course, there is everywhere. And that's something we need to work on. But there certainly isn't genocide. That needs to be taken off the table. And it infuriates me that governments and journalists are lobbing these types of allegations as innuendo. And you know what? I've been criticized by a lot of these people. And now you're starting to see some of these people backtrack.
Right.
And they say, well, genocide doesn't mean extermination. Well, of course it does. 99% of the world's population equates genocide and extermination as the same.
Right.
Okay? Now they're saying, well, we don't mean it's actual killing. It just means, cultural genocide. Where they're making people learn Mandarin, which we've already addressed. Obviously, you have to learn Mandarin if you're going to do well.
Right.
I also, again, look, I lost family during the Holocaust. I just feel that these critics of China are desecrating the memories of Jews, Romani, homosexuals who truly died in true genocides. You can't use that term lightly. And it's incredible to me that Mike Pompeo, that Tony Blinken, that Nicholas Burns, are all using the term genocide. Mike Pompeo, he doesn't care about China. He doesn't care about America. He just cares about his presidential ambitions. You're going to see the same types of things from a guy like Tom Cotton, a senator from Arkansas. One of the problems in the United States right now is our senators, our representatives, they are getting elected by a very small minority of Americans. Only 20, 30% of the constituents in a state are actually voting for senator. Tom Cotton, when he ran for re-election last year in Arkansas, he actually ran unopposed by any Democrat.
Right.
How on earth is that showing, people's representative democracy? He ran unopposed. Now, for these guys in the U.S., the crazier you talk, the louder you talk, the more warmongering you are, the more likely you're going to get covered by the newspapers, and the most likely then you're going to be able to raise more money and get reelected.
Simple question here. Why is it so difficult for Western countries and people around the world to understand China?
I've known one of the problems, I think, is media, right? U.S. media. Okay. I have known most of the New York Times journalists in China over the last 20 years, and you would be shocked at how many of them, even Pulitzer Prize winners, don't speak Chinese. So one of the problems is you have people who are basically illiterate, who are trying to cover a very complex, large, fast-changing country. How can illiterate people do that? Well, they're now quoting other illiterate people. You have this echo chamber of quote-unquote China experts that very often are in the United States that the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post continue to interview over and over again.
Right.
That's one issue. Second, I think part of it is China's fault, right? I think China's government does an incredible job of communicating to the Chinese people. And that's why in all of our research, most Chinese support the central government and support the direction the central government is taking the country. I mean, the Pew Center has found that. Harvard under Tony Sage has found that. My own research firm has all found similar numbers. 85, 90% of people support the direction the central government's taking the country. Right. It's actually increased in the last 2 years because Chinese see how good China's response has been to COVID, while how absolutely crappy the response has been in India or the United States or in Brazil and the world's largest democracies.
Right.
But you see, China's government really does a bad job at communicating to the rest of the world. And I think they really need to improve, their global propaganda, if you want to use that term, propaganda, or their global publicity. They just don't give themselves enough credit. They don't use the right words. They need to use more humor. They need to use more wit, a little bit more charisma. I think that would be important. I'd love to see Xi Jinping sit down with someone like me for an interview on TV, or someone like you, or with an objective Western journalist. Deng Xiaoping did it. Jiang Zemin did it. Why hasn't Xi Jinping done that? Because people in China support him. Yeah. And I think it would be good if the rest of the world can hear directly from the head of state what's really happening in China. I think China sometimes they respond to every critic way too often. And they turn some of these losers into heroes. I'll give an example. There's a guy named Ba Diaotao, I think his name is. He's a mainland Chinese who now lives in Australia, but he's very critical of China. And he was launching a tiny little exhibit, I think it was in Italy or someplace in Europe. And the Chinese consulate criticized and made solemn representations to this mayor of this tiny village and saying, why are you allowing this exhibit? Right. Why do you do things like that? Now this has become a big story, all the big Western paper cover that, and now this guy becomes a hero in the movement. China needs to get a little bit more global standards when it comes to global communication.
That's a really good insight. That's a really good insight there. And Sean, I think the best way to conclude this interview tonight is asking the same question I ask everybody here, and that is, what is one thing that you would like the world to know about China?
The one thing is that China is not perfect. And I've never heard anyone in the government say that China's perfect. They say there's a lot of shortcomings and a lot of problems, but look at how much we've improved in the last 40 years. And here's the plan for the next 5-10 years to reduce some of these problems. I think too many people in the Western world think that there isn't open debate or open discussion or open recognition of some of the problems in China. People here aren't stupid. People here aren't brainwashed. People here are very open and understand then not everything is perfect. But the good side is the government, the people working together all have a plan, to try to reduce poverty, to try to reduce pollution, to try to reduce corruption. So nobody thinks it's perfect, but everybody recognizes that there is a plan in place. And I think that's important that much of the rest of the world doesn't realize. For some reason, they think we're all brainwashed. And I think whenever somebody calls Chinese brainwashed, I know the Chinese are the ones who aren't brainwashed.
Yeah. No, very, very good answer there. That's fantastic. And Sean, I want to thank you so much for taking time, from your busy work schedule to join us here from your office in Shanghai. And everyone, if you notice at the top of your screen, I've put in 3 screenshots of Sean's book. I'm going to put links to all 3 of those books. You can buy them on Amazon. I'm going to put links down in the description below. I'm also going to put a link to Sean's Twitter account. He really provides some great insights almost daily. And again, he's a great follow on Twitter. I'm going to put also his website down there so you can find more information and also to connect with him on LinkedIn. So Sean, I really want to thank you again for your time and joining me. I know we've been trying for a year, to get our schedules aligned. It's been so fascinating to chat with you. And I thank you so much for sharing all your insights with everybody here on the YouTube channel.
Well, thank you, Cyrus, for having me, and thank you for doing what you do. We need more objective shows like yours that try to improve U.S.-China relations. So thank you.